They told me, sit down and be grateful. They thought they had won, but what they didn't know was that I had been holding the winning card all along. It all started when I was handed a box of mismatched server cables and told, "Welcome to data flow. Can you handle the network operations today, Sky?" That was my first day. No desk, no orientation, just 47 tangled Ethernet cords, 3 unpaid interns, and a coffee machine that had seen better days. 14 years later, that same man, Richard Crestwell, told me, "You're the only reason this place is still breathing." He meant it. I was the one holding this tech startup together, while Blake, the heir to the entire operation, was busy failing out of MIT and DJing at rooftop parties with girls who thought Dataflow was a new streaming app. Back then, Dataflow Solutions was more garage than global, with shaky servers, venture capital that showed up late like a dramatic X, and a CEO who thought cybersecurity meant just changing the password once a year. But I didn't mind. I believed in what we were building. Data compression algorithms, AI-driven analytics, and network optimization that could revolutionize the industry. It was messy, brilliant work, and someone had to keep the system running. That someone was me, Sky Hensley. COO by title, tech whisperer by nature, war general when the corporate raiders circled. I was the one who knew which server rack hummed when you sneezed near it, which investors needed a specific brand of scotch before a meeting, and which developers cried in the server room on a full moon. Richard trusted me with the secrets, the real ones. How we once covered payroll by pawning a prototype chip to a medtech rep who asked no questions and had a weak stomach. Or how we accidentally double-booked an SEC auditor and a Chinese investor in the same room and made it look like a collaborative session. Blake, on the other hand, was just background noise. A trust fund fungus who'd pop in once a quarter to ask if we had any mental health retreats in the budget, then disappear with an office iPad and 3 cases of sparkling water. His only real contribution was once suggesting we rebrand our proprietary data encryption as CyberZing. I told him it sounded like a knockoff energy drink for toddlers. He pouted and said I wasn't a visionary. Still, I never complained. Not when the all-nighters turned my skin pale. Not when the board dinners felt like hostage negotiations. Not even when my name was quietly listed second after Blake's on the annual report. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought Richard would never let him near the main controls. I thought, foolishly, that legacy meant more than lineage. But legacy doesn't wear designer sneakers or call senior engineers code gremlins. Legacy doesn't wink at you while gutting your division and say, "Nothing personal, just pivoting." The email came through at 6:43 a.m., time-stamped like a slap. Leadership transition announcement. Richard Crestwell to step back as CEO, effective immediately. No warning, no call, just a line about prioritizing health and family. And buried beneath it, like the punchline to a sick joke, Blake Crestwell appointed interim CEO. I stared at the screen so long my coffee went cold. My hands didn't shake. My jaw didn't clench. I just sat there and felt something slip, like a tendon tearing in slow motion. By 9 a.m., Blake waltzed into the office wearing a bomber jacket that looked like it cost more than our entire quarterly equipment budget. His first move? He disbanded our compliance team. His second move? He turned the lunchroom into an innovation lounge, taking out the vending machines and replacing them with foosball tables. His third? He fired Dana, our lead data scientist, because he didn't vibe with her energy. I pulled him aside after that one. Quietly, clearly, I told him. Dana holds the patent trail to 3 of our core algorithm processes. If she walks, we lose 6 years of development and about $30 million in projected revenue. Blake blinked at me like I'd asked him to solve a riddle. Then she should have been nicer to the vibes. He laughed. I didn't. Within 2 weeks, a reorganization tsunami had gutted most of the old crew. Project managers were replaced with workflow architects. Data analysts were reduced to 2 contractors with online profiles and MacBooks held together by motivational stickers. And me? I was suddenly being CC'd on fewer threads, my calendar mysteriously wiped clean, and half my responsibilities reassigned to a 24-year-old strategy consultant who once asked if our servers were part of our cloud storage. It wasn't just reckless. It was surgical stupidity performed with the confidence of a man who'd never failed publicly because his father always bailed him out. But I didn't scream, didn't quit. I waited. Because 5 years ago, during one of Dataflow's darkest weeks, when payroll had to be wired in thirds and our main investor threatened to sue for breach, I sat with Richard in a dim hotel bar with a legal pad and a fifth of bourbon. We'd created a fail-safe, an IP escrow agreement buried in the supplemental filings that protected the core intellectual property in case of unforeseen leadership compromise. Clause 47B. The transfer of all operational license rights to a neutral trust, executed upon discretionary signal by the named trustee. That trustee? Yours truly. It was meant to shield the company, but it was also Richard's insurance. If Blake ever tried to cannibalize what we built, I could pull the ripcord. Blake had no clue it even existed. That night, I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon and pulled out the original envelope, still sealed in that brittle, yellowing paper. I hadn't looked at it in years. The wax seal was cracked. The signature, his real one, was intact. I didn't open it, not yet, but I set it on my desk like a loaded gun. The notification came from payroll like it was routine. Your upcoming deposit reflects the updated compensation structure per new fiscal policies. Except it wasn't routine. It was $38,500 short. No bonus, no equity adjustment, no word. Just gone like my worth had been erased with a backspace key and a smug smile. I marched into HR. Denise, who once cried in my office after her divorce and called me her work mom, suddenly had the warmth of an airport security agent with a bad day. "Sky, we reviewed your compensation under the revised contract standards," she droned. "There was no explicit renewal of your prior clause." "So Blake forgot to renew it," I interrupted. She didn't blink. "That's not how we're framing it." "You're framing theft," I said. She slid a folder across the desk like a hostage ransom note. Revised org chart. My name had been quietly bumped. No press release, no meeting, just a silent bureaucratic execution. I was now listed as Director of Strategic Coordination, which meant exactly nothing. My actual team was dissolved, scattered, and urged into agile pods led by people who thought SOP stood for some other person. The humiliation was quiet, surgical, like being buried alive under buzzwords and chat messages that used too many emojis. But I didn't rage, didn't cry. Instead, I opened a blank spreadsheet and labeled the first tab Insurance. Then I got to work. I printed every HR change memo I'd ever signed, archived them offline, highlighted date discrepancies, flagged the missing authorization signatures on the restructuring orders, and pulled every meeting invite where Blake demoted my scope but never recorded the minutes. I screenshotted chat threads, backed up my entire inbox, and made 3 encrypted thumb drives. One went to a safety deposit box, one to a lawyer friend, and one stayed taped under my desk drawer. Then came the board minutes. Blake bragged about flattening senior leadership and optimizing veteran headcount. Every time he chuckled about it, I smiled along, but I logged the timestamps, every single one. You see, when a man like Blake wants you gone, he doesn't fire you. He strips you layer by layer until you're just a husk of your former authority. Then he waits for you to leave on your own so he can call it natural attrition. But I wasn't going anywhere. The paper trail wasn't just for my revenge. It was the blueprint to his ruin. He walked into my office unannounced, all teeth and too much cologne, like a discount motivational speaker who'd watched The Social Network one too many times. "Name's Troy," he said, leaning on my desk like he owned it. "I'm here to observe and optimize strategic throughput." "Great," I said flatly, not looking up from my screen. "You can start by throughputting yourself into the supply closet." Blake had brought in a small army of consultants from some startup strategy firm that sounded like a made-up word. Half of them wore sneakers that cost more than my rent. The other half took notes on tablets like they were FBI profilers. Their job: shadow key personnel, identify redundancies, and recommend leadership transitions. Translation: find a way to fire me without legal backlash. Troy was my assigned barnacle for 2 weeks. He followed me everywhere. He asked how I handled task velocity bottlenecks, aka responding to emails. He suggested I translate legacy knowledge into transferable modules, which meant I could give away everything I knew before I got canned. But I had already reconnected with someone who mattered. Her name was Alicia Sandberg, our in-house counsel, now promoted to junior partner at the firm that handled Dataflow's contracts. 5 years ago, she was a nervous intern who wore mismatched shoes to her first pitch meeting. I had coached her through the brutal climb of tech law, called her kiddo, and told her to trust no one who uses the phrase intellectual synergy in a sentence. When I called, she answered on the first ring. "Alicia, I need you to pull something from the vault," I said. "Escrow clause, IP holding structure, year 5 filings. You remember?" She did, and her voice shifted from warm to sharp in 2 syllables. "You want to trigger it?" "Not yet," I said. "I need the paperwork prepped, authenticated, and under lock with redundancies." She didn't ask why. She just said, "I'll run conflict checks on our end. But Sky, this is a big gun." I looked at the glass office wall where Troy was watching me fumble with a fake quarterly dashboard. "He's loading his," I said. The boardroom smelled like money and betrayal, polished mahogany, artisanal water bottles, and the faint stink of Blake's overpriced cologne. The quarterly executive meeting had turned into one of his signature theater pieces, a slideshow of buzzwords, condescending smirks, and forced chuckles from terrified department heads. He waited until the final agenda item, legacy role optimization, to swing the axe. "We've taken steps to evolve certain outdated positions into more streamlined leadership nodes," Blake said, tapping the screen like he'd just discovered fire. Then he turned to me, smiling like a crocodile in a kid's pool. "Sky's been with Dataflow since we were held together by duct tape and caffeine. She's done great support work." "Support," he said, and I felt 14 years reduced to a footnote. "I think it's time," he continued, "for Sky to transition into an advisory role. External, of course, so we can open space for more adaptive leadership styles." There was a hush, then some awkward throat clearing. A board member I once helped avoid an SEC audit stared at his lap like it owed him money. Then Blake delivered the line he'd clearly rehearsed. "You should sit down and be grateful, Sky. Most people your age don't get this kind of soft landing." I didn't blink, didn't breathe, just nodded. "You're right," I said evenly. "I'll take some time to process." He gave me a patronizing half nod, already looking at his phone. The meeting moved on. I walked out without a word, no scene, no dramatics, just a click of the heels and a quiet exit, like a ghost leaving its own funeral. Back in my office, I closed the blinds, locked the door, and turned off every device with a camera. Then I opened the drawer. The envelope was still there, creased, yellowing, stamped with the original firm's seal. I slid the contents into my lap. A USB drive, a notarized letter, and a hard copy of the original agreement. My name was etched next to trustee of escrow activation rights in Richard's slanted, jittery handwriting, proof that once he trusted me more than his own blood. I inserted the USB and entered the 22-character password. The screen blinked once and displayed the dormant escrow protocol, a detailed, time-stamped flowchart of how to sever Dataflow's IP rights from operational use and transfer them to a neutral holding firm, one registered under my maiden name, fully legal and irrevocable once filed. I spent the next 2 hours drafting the activation letter. Every sentence was a scalpel. I included citations, footnotes, and backup documentation. Alicia had already verified the submission path and compliance requirements. All that remained was the signature. But I didn't send it. Not yet. I printed 2 copies, slipped one into an envelope addressed to Dataflow's general counsel, and the other I folded carefully and slid into my coat pocket. Then I poured myself a drink. Blake thought I had been cornered, that his little public humiliation had broken me. But humiliation isn't a wound, it's a fuse. The fiduciary agent picked up on the second ring, their voice smooth like old jazz. "Miss Hensley, this is my formal notice," I said. "I'm executing Clause 4.7b. The conditions have been met. I'll be in before noon to sign." A pause, then. "Understood. We'll have the documentation and witnesses prepared." Click. No drama, no fireworks, just the trigger on a trap 5 years in the making. By 11:20 a.m., I was standing in a high-rise office above the city, the kind with soundproof glass and carpeting that muffled sins. The notary stamped the activation letter. I signed in 3 places. The fiduciary rep verified the backup signatures. Then he handed me a copy like a priest handing over last rites. "Effective immediately," he said. "All control over the operational license for Dataflow Solutions IP is suspended pending review. Transfer into Hensley Trust Holdings has begun." I walked out lighter, not happy, not triumphant, just clean, like I'd finally scrubbed the filth off my skin. Back at Dataflow, no one knew. Not yet. The irony is, they were too busy celebrating. Unbeknownst to me, Dataflow had just entered due diligence talks with Nexus Dynamics, a tech Goliath with a hard-on for our data analytics patents. I overheard it while passing the executive suite, Blake laughing, glass of champagne in hand, telling the business development team to make it sparkle. Word was the acquisition could push Dataflow's valuation north of $500 million. Only one catch. The patents they were pitching, they no longer had the rights to them. I scheduled a final meeting under the pretense of exit feedback, one last morsel of grace to feed Blake's ego. His assistant called it a classy move, said Blake appreciated my maturity. The meeting was set for Friday at 10 o'clock a.m., with the full board in attendance. On Thursday, I wore black, not for drama, for symbolism. I handed off the transfer confirmation packet to Alicia via courier. She would file the public notice an hour before the board meeting began. I rehearsed exactly what I would say. Not too much, not too soon, just enough to let the floor creak before the collapse. That night, I watched Blake on LinkedIn, posting some smug quote about leadership and disruptive humility. His photo, smiling with the same teeth he'd bared at me in that meeting, was already going viral, with Dataflow employees clapping like trained seals in the comments. He thought he was invincible. He didn't know that everything he was standing on was already in my name. The cave wasn't dark anymore. It was wired, primed, and just waiting for the torch. The conference room was ice cold, like always. Blake liked his room sterile, probably because real warmth made him sweat. The board sat in their assigned spots, pretending to care about the exit feedback of a woman they'd already ghosted. Blake lounged at the head, legs crossed, fingers steepled, smiling like a man rehearsing a TED Talk in his head. "Sky?" he said, gesturing like I was some plucky intern pitching a new coffee vendor. "Grateful you wanted to leave on good terms. Let's keep it brief, yeah?" I smiled. "Of course." I passed around the envelope. "Before I go," I said, "there's just one minor clarification regarding the company's intellectual property licenses. As of 9:02 this morning, the transfer terms for the core IP portfolio are no longer valid." There was a pause. You could hear the molecules shift. Blake blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" I turned to Alina, the new legal counsel, some Harvard law transplant who hadn't heard of me until 2 weeks ago. You should have a digital submission from my attorney on file, time-stamped. Escrow activation letter. Enclosure includes the original agreement from 2018, Richard Crestwell's signature, and the transfer trigger conditions, all met. Alina's brow furrowed. She opened her laptop, clicked, and froze. I need a minute. No rush, I said, folding my hands. We should all be aware that the current pending acquisition talks will require revision. As of this morning, Dataflow no longer holds operational control over its own IP. Blake stood. What the hell are you talking about? Clause 4.7b, I said calmly, like a teacher explaining to a child why scissors aren't for running. The one your father and I filed when the company nearly collapsed. You demoted me without a board vote, reassigned my duties, and breached the original leadership continuity terms. That triggered the escrow release. The patents now sit under Hensley Trust Holdings. Legally, permanently. Murmurs shot around the table like static. One board member whispered to another. Phones appeared under the table. Someone coughed too loud. Blake pointed at Alina. You missed this? How did this get past legal? She shook her head, pale and blinking fast. It's airtight. I'm reading the originals now. Witnessed, notarized, and... Oh my God, it's all valid. I trusted you people to watch this stuff. He barked. Funny, I said, standing slowly and smoothing my jacket. That's what Richard used to say about you. He turned to me, his voice shaking. You can't do this. I stepped forward and lowered my voice. You already did. The room felt smaller now, cramped with realization. Blake's eyes darted between faces as the walls of confidence he'd built with charm and legacy crumbled like drywall under a leak. I didn't raise my voice, didn't gloat. I just watched him begin to drown in the truth, and I smiled, not because I enjoyed the pain, but because I had earned the clarity of watching a liar finally see his reflection. The first headline hit before I'd even finished my eggs. Dataflow IP dispute freezes acquisition. Shares plummet 23%. The second came 20 minutes later. Whistleblower clause erupts in legal firestorm at Dataflow Solutions. By noon, the vultures were already circling. I watched it unfold from a quiet booth in a diner 2 towns over, eating hash browns with too much pepper and just the right amount of spite. Every TV screen played the same footage. Blake stumbling out of the boardroom, avoiding reporters, looking like a tech bro vampire caught in daylight. The boy had finally run out of mirrors to admire himself in. My phone buzzed nonstop. Board members, ex-teammates, and a frantic message from Denise in HR that just said, "What did you do?" And Blake, of course, called twice from his number, then once blocked, then once from his assistant's phone, like I wouldn't recognize that pathetic detour. I let them all rot in voicemail purgatory. By 3 p.m., Dataflow's legal team had issued a shaky public statement about temporary realignment of IP access during due diligence resolution. Translation: We don't know what the hell just happened, and we're hoping you don't either. The stock dipped again, another 11%. Someone on Reddit was already posting memes of Blake with a clown nose photoshopped on, captioned Datafail Solutions. Sit down and be grateful, bro. That part I did save. Later that night, I met with a man named Roth from Neurogene, the same competitor Dataflow had once tried to poach a CSO from, badly. He was older, careful, drank bourbon neat, and never once asked why I didn't have a LinkedIn profile. He just slid an envelope across the table. Executive board seat, he said, an oversight on integration of the IP portfolio. We've already started talking to your legal. I looked at the figure on the offer letter, let out a slow, bitter chuckle. Tell me, I asked, sipping my drink. What's the first thing you'd like me to dismantle? He smiled. Whatever he built. I signed it on the spot. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was colder, cleaner. The kind of satisfaction you get after draining a septic tank. Necessary, filthy, and final. Blake built his kingdom on my labor and his father's name. Then he set it on fire with a smile and asked me to clap for the sparks. He thought power was a title, but power is knowing where the exits are and who holds the deed. And baby, I'd held that deed for years. The emergency shareholder meeting looked more like a crime scene. Cameras everywhere, suits sweating through silk, and a hastily printed banner that read, "Transparency and transition," hung crooked. Like even it didn't buy the lie. Blake sat center stage under white-hot lights, wearing a navy suit that tried too hard to scream competence. His voice, once all confidence and smug cadence, now cracked like ice under too much weight. "There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Some old paperwork. We're confident this will be resolved swiftly." A hand went up, then another. Someone from the London investor group stood and asked the question that cut through the theater. "Who the hell is Hensley Trust Holdings?" Blake froze, his mouth slightly open, like his brain had just gotten caught between two gears. The general counsel leaned in and whispered something. He shook his head, disbelieving, panicking. Then came the moment. An older shareholder, gray suit, liver spots, raged like a slow boil, stood and handed a printout across the table. Crisp paper, large font, no frills. Clause 4.7b, IP Transfer Escrow, Trustee, Sky Hensley. Blake read it, his eyes flicking left to right like he was trying to blink his way out of reality. "Dad," he muttered under his breath, his voice thin and cracking. What did she just do? But Richard wasn't there to answer. Only the cameras, only the silence, only the proof that the son had just been outmaneuvered by the woman he tried to erase. Across town, I sat on my balcony, legs crossed, with a glass of red wine in my hand, and the live stream muted. I didn't need the sound. The look on his face said it all. Shock, disbelief, the slow dawning horror that everything he thought was owed to him had just been surgically ripped out with a clause he never bothered to read. The city glowed beneath me. Below, some poor delivery guy nearly got hit by a scooter. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, but in my apartment there was silence, peace. I raised my glass to the screen. "Gratitude," I whispered to myself. I finally gave him a reason for it. This story, like the original, is a reminder that competence and integrity will always win out over arrogance and privilege. The most powerful moves aren't always the loudest. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is to remain calm, observant, and patient, letting your quiet work and forethought speak for itself. True power comes not from a title, but from a deep understanding of the system and the foresight to secure your position, even when others are trying to erase you. It teaches us to value our own contributions and to never underestimate the importance of preparation and an exit strategy. The strongest structures aren't built on a legacy of names, but on a foundation of unyielding principles and meticulous planning.